Episode 56 of the Church Digital podcast, powered by Stadia Church Planning. I got to tell you, Stadia's planted over 1,000 churches, and we are out there right now trying to make sure those 1,000 churches are stable, safe, and sound. And we're not really just drawing the border at those 1,000. This is what I love about Stadia. We're creating resources and helping churches beyond, trying to figure out how to master this digital church, this church online thing. By the way, check this out. There's a Facebook group. The easiest way to get there is if you go to theChurch.digital/coronavirus. On that, there's a number of resources we've created, but one of the best resources we have out there today is a Facebook group that's managed by us, but also managed by a bunch of Stadia people, where they're getting in there, churches are getting in there, they're talking about what they're experimenting with, whether it's working, whether it's not working, and encouraging us together as we're out there trying to figure out how to beat this coronavirus thing, and by utilizing digital tools and church online. So if you're not part of that, you can look for Church Online and Coronavirus in Facebook, or head over to thechurch.digital/coronavirus and find the link there on that page. Well, I got to tell you, I have been sitting on this podcast for a couple of weeks. We recorded this probably the day before the coronavirus, I hesitate to say the word outbreak, before everything exploded, moving off the West Coast, more towards the East Coast here in America. And I have been itching to share this podcast interview with you, because this has been, the Ed Stetzer podcast, that interview was fun. This one was more fun than Ed, because it really, I felt like I was talking to like a clone copy of me. We were so on the same page with a number of different things. So the interview is with Daniel M., who is in Canada. He's works with Lifeway. He does a number of things. He's written a number of books. And honestly, the heart of this is we really delved into his book called No Silver Bullets. Now, this is an older book. We're going back to 2015. But honestly, just recently I read it. There's a church I'm working with, and they're having some discipleship level issues within the church. How do we keep people on mission? What does discipleship look like? We're having issues with kind of taking people to that next deeper level. And really, I delved into this book. Like I said in the podcast, it was stuck on my Kindle. I bought it years ago, just never read it. And as I read it, honestly, my heart just leapt. And I caught this vision for what a discipleship movement in a church could be if it was done with intentionality. But on top of that, I caught a larger vision of what a discipleship method could be if it was executed digitally to complement churches that are out there. And so the more that Daniel in his book talked about discipleship, the more that I had this greater understanding of what it could be in a digital environment. And that made me very happy. So we're having this conversation with Daniel M., and it is literally on the eve of the coronavirus explosion that has happened here in America and around the world here with this global pandemic. So there's definitely application points that we talk about here about how to get people on mission. But it talks to a lot to the heart of what it actually means to be intentional towards making disciples in a physical environment as well as a virtual one. It's been a great podcast, a great conversation here with Daniel M., Lifeway, as well as a number of other resources and connection points. No Silver Bullets for Church Online. That's the name of the episode here at the Church Digital Podcast. Here y'all go.
Hey, Jeff.
Hey, how are you doing?
I'm doing
Daniel,
well.
nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Hey, I want to thank you for jumping on this podcast. It's been a hectic couple days, hectic
No
week
kidding.
or so for all of us, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But man, I wanted to thank you for sticking with this and allowing this conversation to happen.
It'll be good. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I want to sing your praise, and I'll do this on the podcast a little bit. But I bought your book several years ago, and it sat on my Kindle, as typically books do. I got the app. We'll get there eventually later, maybe sorta.
Mhm.
And one of the churches I was working at, Christ Journey Church, starting to run into some discipleship issues and some things. It's like, yeah, there's got to be a better way to do this. We haven't figured it out. And there's this No Silver Bullets book. I want to go back to that.
Yeah.
And it really, I read it and I was like, oh, this is so good. This is exactly what they need. And I tend to be an extremist, kind of alarmist type of guy. Like, we have to do this like now.
Yeah.
And I made key staff read it, and they're like, "Oh, this is so good," and it really helped kind of pivot the culture, or at least bring awareness to that. And
Oh,
I
that's
know you're not
awesome.
even, I know that's not even like the thing that you're like pushing and promoting. It may be old school compared to
That's
some of
all
the other
good.
stuff, but
Yeah.
it's like I'm in this moment, and I'm like, man, I really want to like just explore this and talk with Daniel more about it. So thanks for like kind of going old school here, revisiting 2015 a little bit, uh,
Dude, man.
and going
Yeah,
back to it.
I love talking about it, and even when I wrote it, it was this commitment to say, okay, do I believe enough about this that I'm willing for at least the next 10 years to talk about this topic? So, yeah. And yeah, I love it. So, I'm glad to talk about it.
Well, you picked a really good topic to talk about, at least from a relevancy standpoint, because we're
Mm,
seeing culture shift more away from the buildings. But here with the Church Digital podcast, we talk a lot about church online
mm.
and digital church. I've actually taken a role recently. I honestly, I think this is even since we scheduled the podcast with you, but I'm with Stadia Church Planting, where I'm director of digital church planting. We're looking at a digital only expression
Oh,
of
that's
church
awesome.
that doesn't exist in physical. It's more of a digital virtual. Biblical ecclesiology of what does an actual church look like that would be digital only, and which really is a fascinating conversation for me that's centered more around a discipleship driven model, a discipleship process, discipleship pathway. A lot of
Mm,
these words that I just keep resonating over and over
mm-hmm.
with, and honestly, like, in the back of my mind, I just going back to No Silver Bullets. I'm like, I have to write this book. I'm going to have to write this book. I haven't found anybody to really say what I want to say.
Yeah.
And then I read No Silver Bullets, and I'm like, yes, I don't have to write the book. I don't have to go through all this struggle because my man here, Daniel M's, already said it and is starting to roll through it. So
Mm,
I love how what you're talking about with this intentional discipleship, I think it's a wake up call for churches
yeah.
towards getting more on board with that today, being intentional with it, as opposed to being lackadaisical and some of those things. But even in context of online,
Mm-hmm.
using church online to create some of those intentional points to foster that development and growth is so good. And so, man, just thanks for jumping on here. I have to know this,
Yeah. Yeah.
and we'll dig in, right?
Yeah.
Um,
This will be good.
how where did this the idea of no silver bullets and just even the four quadrants, if you want to highlight that, like, where did this come from?
Yeah. Okay. So the old school original where the whole thing was birthed, it was when I was doing my master's at Fuller, and it was an MA in global leadership. And basically, my final project was and it's all contextual to your church, the way they did their thing. So for me, then I was trying to figure out, hey, how do I create a discipleship pathway that's scalable within a multi-site context? Thinking also post-Christian too, being in Canada, but just a sense of a scalable multi-site discipleship pathway that can actually that works in different sizes of churches, right? Where you have maybe 2,000 people gathered in one location, 100 in another, 400 or 500 in another. So what would that look like? And that's really the origin of it, around the ongoing steps, the first steps, the next steps. But man, that harkens all the way back to like 2013. And it's just kind of, it was great. Put it to the side, ended up moving down to Nashville, moving to Lifeway, co-writing Planting Missional Churches with Ed, and basically an acquisitions editor was like, "Hey, do you have like a solo book in you?" And I was like, "Well, there's this thing I've worked on, but I just kind of I never finished it because I didn't think anyone would want to read it. So I sent her, well, what it was, and they're like, okay, well, here's a contract. So that's basically what got it kick started again. And multiple years later, it was a reassessment of, okay, does this still work? Is this timeless? And then how do you actually communicate it? How do you communicate it well? So it was just further research that then got me into doing some research around the quadrants, and had a conversation with Dr. Robert Coleman around that too. I mean, the guy, right? Master plan of evangelism, discipleship. And I was like, okay, if he can get on board with this, then I'm okay.
I love
So
that.
he was my gut check. He was my, am I out to lunch? And he endorsed the books, right? So, I mean, it was cool to have that conversation with him.
That's awesome. I could try to explain I'm going to be honest. I could try to explain the quadrants. It would take me 8 minutes. And I'm willing to bet you've got a 45-second version of the quadrants that you can just nail real quick and roll through this. Seriously, though, just give us a brief synopsis, because I'm sure you're more succinct than I would be.
Okay. So imagine and maybe we'll put in the show notes, right? But imagine a square with 4 quadrants, and you have a copycat church, a silver bullet church, an intentional church, and a hippie church, right? So if we're looking at all 4, these 4 quadrants, what is the difference between each and every one of them? You have the copycat church, that views discipleship is all about getting to a destination. And that's actually what the copycat and the silver bullet church shares. It's all about getting to a destination. So discipleship is about knocking those check boxes off and doing this program, doing that program. And the difference between the copycat church and the silver bullet church is the copycat church, it's literally, go to that conference, we're going to copy this model. Oh, it didn't work. 4 months later, go copy another model. So there's a low sense of accountability there. Okay. The silver bullet church is like the copycat church, where they still see discipleship as checking that off, these external markers. But the difference is, accountability wise, systems wise, it flows and everything looks good. But the metrics for maturity are different. It's actually incorrect the way that they're viewing the metrics for maturity. And then you move it up, right? You then have the intentional church and you have the hippie church. Both, actually, the biggest difference between those ones and the bottom ones is that those ones actually view maturity from a directional standpoint, right? So it's not necessarily the destination you get to, it's more the direction you're pointing in. So there's a key difference, a fundamental difference as to what maturity looks like and what the discipleship process looks like. Is it destination oriented, check the boxes, or is it the direction you're pointing in? And the difference between the hippie church and the intentional church, the hippie church, it's kind of like the copycat church, low culture of accountability, going from one to another. So these are the churches that essentially are like, oh, you want to you don't want to meet together. You just want to listen to worship music and go hike on the mountain and instead of gathering together for worship. Oh yeah, that's fine. That's fine, right? Or you don't have to read the Bible, just read a devotional about the Bible. That's the same thing, right? So it's very lackadaisical. As long as you're pointing in that direction toward Christ, you're fine. Whereas the intentional church, yes, it is directionally focused, but there's a clear pathway to getting to discipling people and getting people along, moving in the right direction. So those are kind of the 4 quadrants summarized.
Yeah, it's really interesting, this idea of destination, and for me with the church that I'm regularly working with, like that was the radical connection for us.
Mm-hmm.
Previous to that, it was the Rick Warren baseball diamond, and far be it for me to be overly critical of that, because I think that was revolutionary at the time and really helped a lot of churches move forward, churches that I've been on staff with and worked with. But the reality is that 401, that home plate, that people being on mission, like nobody ever makes it to that class. It's amazing. Everybody that does the 101, you lose 20% for the 201, you lose 20% for the 301. And by the time you get down to the 401, it's like, oh, this is for people who are going specific on the global missions trip. Let's just make that the 401, and it's a far minimal audience percentage of people that are attending. But as a result of that, we're really missing this opportunity to have people be on mission,
Mm-hmm.
where on mission may be defined as something like and once again, I don't want to be overcritical, but hey, let me serve coffee here, or let me be guest services or something. And all these are important, but
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to personal evangelism, when it comes to disciple making, with the things where we look at today's culture and we realize, wow, like the best way for our church to be impactful is not our physical building and
Mm-hmm.
doing these events in our buildings, but it's all about empowering people
Mm-hmm.
to have spiritual conversations that go and share their faith and then to
Yeah. Yeah.
disciple others.
Mm-hmm.
Lifeway, like the place where you work, and this is an older stat, but I quote it
Mm-hmm.
all the time. By the way, if you guys could update this stat, I would really appreciate it. 2016 Lifeway, 63% of people are no longer interested in going to the buildings to learn about their faith. And at the
Mm-hmm.
same way that I myself, I'm not interested in going to a mosque. I think I
Mm-hmm.
figured out what I know at the spiritual level, and I'm not really open to more conversations.
Mm-hmm.
79% of people are open to talking about faith with their friends if they see that faith is important to their friends. And so, for me, when I look at the opportunity of church online, it's let's utilize this online technology. Let's
Mm-hmm.
utilize it to create a discipleship pathway, a
Mm-hmm.
direction that creates in people this desire to be a disciple maker, to be a multiplier of
Mm-hmm.
others.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a consumer level thing as much as it is a multiplier aspect of that.
Yeah.
Man, just hearing some of that, like, what do you think of that? What are some challenges? What are some wins? What about utilizing technology in this way to create to multiply disciples?
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. In my book No Silver Bullets, I talk about this idea of a high tech and a high touch approach to leadership development. And in the book, I really focus it in and around leadership development. But when it comes to discipleship, right, there has to be the touch component to it, right? I mean, there has to be the interaction focus to it. Now, I think that doesn't mean it has to be in person. I think there's a sense of, are you on, is this active, or is it a passive approach, right? So as it relates to a high tech and a high touch approach, especially with church online, there is a sense of, okay, am I a passive consumer of this, or is there active interaction? Like you and I, this is very active for you and I. For the listeners, it's passive, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that's the biggest difference. So as it relates to discipleship and the sense of, okay, what does a high tech and a high touch approach look like? It can very much be, hey, as a small group, we are going to gather together on Zoom, right? And we are going to, yes, it's high tech, and yeah, we're not in person, but it's active, right? So I think there's this whole sense of we need to have a proactive approach rather than this passive approach, especially as it relates when we're leveraging technology, but especially as it relates to discipleship.
So yeah, I love the fact that you referenced high tech, high touch. I
Mm.
actually read a book 20 years ago. I think I was in college, called High Tech, High Touch by Larry Nesbitt.
Okay.
I
Okay.
guarantee you've never been in a podcast that referenced Larry Nesbitt. He was a business guy.
No.
It was early on. It was like before Y2K.
Okay.
But it
Okay.
was this general principle that technology is, and I forgive me, like I'm old. I don't know how old you are, but I'm not so old to be like the grumpy old guy. Get off my lawn, aka Ed Stetzer. We'll talk about him later. He's fun. I love Ed.
Yeah.
We did a podcast with him recently, and it was awesome. But this high tech, high touch with Larry Nesbitt, the principle is that technology by itself, left to itself, is cold. It's
Yeah.
isolated, and so it's very easy when you don't pay attention to the high touch level. I
Mm-hmm.
think you are guilty. We as a church are guilty of utilizing church online to create consumers.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
that, so if we leave it isolated, if we leave it unto itself, we
Mm-hmm.
are people who are creating content for consuming
Mm.
as opposed to building relationships. It's funny. Actually, like get off my lawn. That's literally a quote from Ed Stetzer when he was on my podcast. We'll link to it in the show notes. It was, I
Yeah.
think it was episode 49. I'll tell you this, Daniel. It was, I don't know that I've said this publicly, but it's cool. Ed, I love you if you're listening. I'm friends with Ed. We used to
Yeah.
work
Yeah. Yeah.
Christ Fellowship Miami, and so Ed
I
told me
know
in
Ed
the
very well. So
podcast. Oh yeah.
yeah.
He told me he's like, don't ask me questions on Church Online, and I'm like, why not? And he's like, you're not going to like my questions if you ask me on Church Online.
Yeah.
And I'm like, come on, Ed, can I get like constructive criticism? Can I say challenges and
Mm,
allow you to give me some feedback? And he's like, just, you can ask me if you want, but just, you're going to get what you're going to get. And I told Ed this. I gave him this pitch of online to offline, that the gospel
mm,
we hear in the online world, it has to affect our offline relationships. And
mm-hmm,
it's a multiplication tool.
mm-hmm.
And it's funny. Ed Stetzer, as soon as I was done, literally he's like, if you're a pastor hearing what Jeff Reed said, you should do this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like he's never heard this idea, but it's like, let's not be consumers and
Mm,
creating this consumers where
mm-hmm,
we're being negative towards this, but let's be intentional. This is why I love your book so much.
mm,
Let's be
mm,
intentional towards disciple making.
mm-hmm.
And I would add a little, wrinkle to it. Let's figure out how to use the online tools to get there.
Yeah.
And another thing that I love for your book, and I
Mm-hmm.
want you to kind of to speak in this and set this up. You use the term social space.
Yeah.
Could you set
Yeah.
up for me, just and for the listening audience, what social space is, and how it kind of relates to this discipleship process?
Definitely, definitely. So let's go back to the 50s, 1950s. Edward T. Hall, anthropologically, he was doing research called proxemics, and he was trying to identify how do animals, he started with animals, realize, okay, how do animals gather together, and does this then relate to humans? So fast forward quite a bit, he basically identified 4 spaces that humans naturally connect in. You got your public space, like all the public spaces that are now being closed down because of the coronavirus. So 100 plus people, right? So there's that side. You got the social space, which is that 20 to 50 person sized space. So think stand-up reception before a wedding. So these kind of fluid spaces. And then you got these personal spaces, which is the third one. That's like 8 to 12 people, like a small group. And you have the fourth space, which is the intimate space, 1 or 2 people. The research basically stated that, hey, in all four spaces, we experience community. But one space, it's not necessarily that one space is more important than the others. They all have their unique benefits, advantages, and disadvantages, and a different ROI for each and every one of them. But the important thing to understand is we actually experience community differently in all 4 spaces. So if this is naturally how humans connect, how are we leveraging these 4 spaces? So Joseph Myers, in his book The Search to Belong, I think it was like early 2000s, he was one of the first ones, I believe, to introduce this concept into the church conversation. And many people have written on it thus far since then. So when you think about that social space, it's that idea, like how I think as churches we do the personal space well, right? Small
Yeah.
groups, we do that well. And some churches, especially with D groups and accountability groups or LTGs or however you want to do it, more and more churches are doing this 1 to 3 person size space well, because those are the spaces where you can open up. Those are the spaces where you can create trust and build those relationships. And a lot of churches do the large public spaces well. I mean, that's kind of the corporate worship gathering, that 20 to 50 person size space. That's the space that's often underutilized. And here's the interesting fact, post writing the book, if you're a church of under 200 people, I don't think there's as much of a need for a formalized 20 to 50 person sized space program or an approach to programming this, because naturally a lot of these spaces will just be there. You'll naturally have them. If you're over 200 though, that's when you actually need to intentionalize these 20 to 50 person size gatherings.
Oh, totally. Like,
Uh-huh.
and we've talked about, I think you may know the exact stat, but something like 80% of churches at this point are under 200. The average church is what, probably 72, 73. It seems like I hear that a
Yeah, in the
lot.
States it's about 100. The
100,
average
around
size church.
100 in the
Yeah,
United
in
States.
Canada
Okay.
it's under 80. Yeah.
Okay.
Hmm.
Yeah. So, but for the mega and the giga church, it's easy
Hmm.
to get lost in that, and if you're
Yeah.
not connected into that, that smaller group, the
Hmm.
one that's down at the personal space area, um, you're lost in accountability almost,
Yeah.
and the church has lost that. And so I love this idea of that social space, that the 20
Hmm.
to 50 number. If I'm putting on my online pastor hat and
Hmm.
digital strategist, I'm looking at that 20 to 50 number thinking, man, what would it look like if that was like house churches or micro locations
Yeah.
around, and I'm looking at, like, Elevation Church with their watch parties, the home gatherings that Saddleback does. We even talk about, you've probably never heard of this, but a church called First Capital Christian in Corden, Indiana. It's a small. I'm going to tell you the story, Daniel. This is
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
This right here is exactly why churches need to understand discipleship at a deeper level. This one, it's in Corden, Indiana. You've never heard of Corden, Indiana, have you? No.
No.
So here's the deal. It's a small town of about 3,000 people. And First Capital Christian, and this is their words. I've had the lead pastor. We've done a couple podcasts with them on. It's on the wrong side of town, on the
Hmm.
outskirts of town, on the no one's around, no
Okay.
residential area. Like,
Yeah.
they bought the property decades ago, and
Yeah.
instead of the town going towards the church, it went away from the church.
Oh, okay.
And so
Okay.
this church has every excuse to just dry up and die.
Yeah.
For some reason, this church has over 1,000 people regularly attending. Now,
In a
I
town of
want to make sure.
3,000?
Yeah, do the math, bro. So I'm like, wait a second. You're telling me you've got 30% attendance in a small town in Indiana, right at
Oh
the
my
Kentucky
goodness.
border. This doesn't.
Wow.
Honest to God, I'm flying out there
Yeah.
in June. In
That's
June, I'm going to speak at a conference,
insane.
and I'm like, I love you
Yeah.
guys. I want to see it for real, and I trust them.
Yeah.
And so, like, the people on, Tyler Sampson's a good friend.
Mm.
He's the engagement pastor over there. But here's where Sacred Space fits in.
Mm.
The story, and we've talked about this in the podcast a lot, where
Mhm.
there was a nurse who worked at a Huntington's rehab center.
Mm.
Basically, it's a terminal disease with that. And so she was working on Sundays, and she was
Mm.
really annoyed that she couldn't get off Sundays because she wanted to go to church. She doesn't want to work Sundays.
Mhm.
But what she would do is she would grab her iPad, go sit in the community center with the iPad on her lap, and just engage watching the church service online.
Mm.
And then one Sunday, like, 2 people gathered around her and started watching the church service. A couple weeks later, 4 people. A couple weeks later, 8 people, 12, 16. There's a photo, I've seen it, with like 20 people gathered around this woman holding an iPad all in like the robes
That's
of
awesome.
hospital gowns,
That is so
experiencing
awesome.
this church. And she takes this photo, texts the church leadership, and says, "Can you help me do ministry here?" This small church, they've literally discipled 18 volunteers, intentionally
Yeah.
grown 18 people to be volunteer campus pastors at
Mm.
18 micro locations
That's
around.
incredible.
It's things like prisons. It's things like
Mm.
orphanages. They're literally adopting people,
Mm.
children, and to be part of the family, solving within this small town. They're getting
Wow.
500 to 600 people engaging in these micro locations. So
Yeah.
I'm bad at math, but they're roughly 1,000, roughly 500, maybe 1,500. Okay, maybe they're
Mm.
getting some crossover, but in a small town of 3,000.
That's
Like,
incredible. Dude, the
and that's
vision
what
of our
happens.
church is to reach 1% of Edmonton. Just 1%. And we're running a few thousand on a weekend, right? So
Oh my
it's just
gosh.
1%. That is incredible.
And what you get from this is the power of empowering someone with the gospel and saying, you
Mhm.
go. The
Mhm.
thing that I love is the people that are the campus pastors,
Mhm.
the volunteer campus pastors, the unpaid people that
Yeah.
are out there doing the ministry, the locations they often go to, they have a
Mm.
personal heart for.
Mm.
It's not like the pastor is running around trying to find all these locations and manage this stuff. It's like, what are you passionate about? Go disciple, make disciples,
Yeah.
grow in that area, and let us, the church, First Capital Christian, let us help you with that. Man,
That's so
just
awesome.
a phenomenal story and a challenge for, I think, a lot of churches out there, that if we could kind of release the priesthood to the believers,
Mm.
let them run, equip them with the power to do this, man, we'd see some phenomenal things happen with multiplication and growth in our city.
Amen. Are you a preacher?
Ha ha ha.
That was
That's a
good. That
funny
was
story.
good.
It depends on who you ask. I'm a technology guy who had a
Well,
midlife crisis
yeah,
and
well, you were
realized,
preaching
hey,
right there, so
we need to do some awesome things for the world,
yeah,
and
that's good.
technology, high tech, high touch, is a part of it. So
Yeah.
hey, I want to keep rolling with this, because once
Mm.
again, in the book, I'm like, this is incredible. This is incredible.
Mm.
You introduced a new term to me,
Mm.
and you got me in trouble with my marriage. I'm gonna call you out, because I asked my wife about this, who has a master's of education, and her
Yeah.
response was not warm back. And so you guys talked about flip the classroom.
Yeah.
Why don't you just give me a little insight? Talk to me, about flip the classroom.
Okay. So, apologies if you got in trouble with your
Oh, it's
wife.
okay. We'll dig into it in a second.
I do
It's
have
it's
a marriage
awesome.
and parenting podcast, so give that to her. No, all that to say, the flipping the classroom idea is, long story short, right? Just a super long story short, it's basically the idea of, okay, instead of, and this is within a church setting, instead of saying, hey, everyone's going to gather here and listen to this talking head, and it's primarily, let's think about a leadership development. So you're training volunteers. Okay, training volunteers, everyone's in a room, you are speaking, here's the lesson, and then everyone goes away, and maybe you pray together or whatever, but then you're done your training, so that's it. The problem with that, though, right, is that it's hard to get 100% of your volunteers to that training environment. It's just, with scheduling and all that stuff, it's just super hard. So the idea of flipping the classroom is, hey, instead, why don't we give the lesson at home or via video, and then when you get together, right, you're flipping it, you then do the work together. So within the school setting, this is, I mean, think back to a world before YouTube. Like,
I live
all
that
right,
world. I
yeah,
know it.
yeah, like 2005, if you shot a video, how did you share it with a friend? Like, how did you share it with anyone else before Facebook, YouTube, or anything, right? It was just so hard. Whereas now it's like, oh, of course, it's easy to share stuff. So the whole idea was basically, in a school classroom, these teachers who got sick and tired of trying to catch up sick, kids who are sick, who missed the class, and having to redo the lecture over and over again, they basically did a voiceover over their PowerPoint lecture, PowerPoint slides voiceover, and they put it up on this new fandangled thing called YouTube. And they said, hey, instead of me reviewing and recapping everything, hey, just watch it. And then more kids watched it, and more kids watched it, and more. And then it started, people who weren't even in that class or that school started watching it. So they're like, oh, maybe we're onto something. So within the school environment, it was basically this idea of, hey, when you're gathered together in a classroom, instead of the teacher teaching, let's flip it so that the lesson is done at home and the homework is done at class, rather than the lesson in class and homework at home. So that's the concept in a nutshell.
Yeah. So my wife, let me finish the story on my side. My
Okay.
wife has a master's of education. She's she's the smart one in the marriage by far.
Yeah.
I'm the dummy, and my kids are brilliant, all because
Yeah.
of her DNA and nothing to do with mine. And so, like, I'm on a plane, and I read your book, and I'm like, this is awesome. I bought the book, Flip the Classroom, that you referenced. There's
Yeah.
lots of different ones out there, but I actually read the specific one, the
Yeah.
two chemistry teachers and,
Yep.
and their story. And it was phenomenal. Super short read, definitely impactful. Great things just for me even processing, what this looks like. And of course, I'm thinking digital discipleship, what it means, or even church online. like processing outside of it. I've had
Yeah.
conversations with, high level organizations working through how to do discipleship online. It's like,
Hmm.
don't watch the videos when you're on Zoom with everybody.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to do that. Watch the videos in advance and take opportunities to dialogue and discuss. That's far more
Yeah.
effective.
Mm.
And so, like, organizations are saying this is awesome. And this is even before I read the book. Like, everything's
Mm.
going great. I'm like,
Mm.
this is awesome. We're swinging momentum. I actually now have a book. It's called, I can have proof. Hey, here are
Yeah.
the guys who actually came up with this concept. Daniel M. said it's great. And
Yeah.
so I asked my wife when I got home at dinner one night after reading the book on the plane. Hey, Amy, have you ever heard of this like flip the classroom thing? And I love my wife, and she was not positive in her response
Oh,
back.
okay.
No, and the response was more centered around, yeah, those are just teachers being lazy. And now, what's interesting, and
That's
there's a
interesting.
lot of
Yeah.
heart. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
she's an educator. Maybe there's some of, and I've told my wife I'm having these conversations. So like people are like, I can't believe he's saying this about his wife. We're fine. It's good. But there's this place of, she's defining who she is by the performance,
Yeah.
um, but not necessarily having the best mind of what's around for the kids, and, and
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
whatever's best for the kids. Maybe we need to break the paradigms of what we're doing
Mm.
so that the students are able to get what they need.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. That's
there's
right.
and I think there's an opportunity for us even within the church.
Mm.
I mentioned this to in a previous podcast, and a digital pastor who's at a multi-site church is, oh, I've heard that lazy comment before. People talk about that all the time when they're talking to pastors who do video teaching to multi-site campuses.
Yeah.
Oh, the other pastors are just being lazy. When in fact, video teaching pastor, the campus pastors that don't have to prep a message, my
Yeah.
gosh, they've got so much more time to be
Yes.
pastoral, shepherding, involved in
Hmm.
people's lives, disciple making. There's a reason why that model's effective. It's not the
Hmm.
perfect model, and I'm not saying necessarily that it is, but there's a great opportunity for us to do something different.
Yeah. Yeah.
How have you seen Flip the Classroom be effective? I want to hear this.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. That's awesome. So, um, how it's very beneficial within a school environment, and let me just do that, and then I'll go to the church environment. How it's super beneficial within a school environment, and also when you're training leaders in your church, is that in a group of 20 people, typical classroom, 30 people, what level do you teach to?
Mm,
Not everyone's at the same level. So you have to generalize it as a teacher in some sense or fashion. And there are going to be people who are on par, listening, engaged. There are going to be some people who are like, I know everything, why this is such a huge bore. And there are going to be others who just don't really get it. And that's just naturally, when you have that many people, it's hard to customize and personalize the lesson. The beauty of flipping the classroom is that if you get the lesson and you're one of those kids who get it, and you're like, yeah, I don't need to sit in a lecture, then just fast forward through it. You don't need to watch the video at home, a lesson, just fast forward. But you need and this is so key, you need some sort of comprehension oriented assignment. So it
mm,
is some sort of homework, but it needs to be some sort of assignment to indicate, that's the accountability side, to indicate that you watched or you got the concept. Right now, if you didn't get the lesson, you can rewind and watch again. If you did, if you're on par, then you watch it all the way through. So the beauty is when you're actually together, because learning, and you look at all the VARC, right? VARC as a model of visual, oral, all the different ways that people learn. Not everyone can learn via auditory as well, or there might not be as much retention that happens through this passive learning. But a lot of learning happens when we're teaching. A lot of learning happens when we're engaging. So when you flip the classroom and the kids are all together, what do you do with the kids who don't get the lesson? You, as a teacher, you don't teach the kids who don't get the lesson. You pair the kids who get the lesson with the kids who don't get the lesson.
mm.
And the kids who get it are teaching the kids who don't get it, because that is one of the most effective ways to learn when you teach, right? And you're saying, hey, can you help Joey here? You get it. And that kid, the learning goes even deeper there. And then the
Mm,
kids who get it, they're doing interactive projects together. So here's the thing, right? Math, why, like I did Kumon, right? And there's a lot of different
sure.
drills, a lot of drills that happen. It's like, okay, why am I doing geometry? Why am I like, it's just drill, drill, drill. You need to learn the formula. What if instead we said, hey, we're gonna build out of toothpicks or out of something. We're going to build this building, but we're going to map it out architecturally to make sure it works. And that's why geometry matters. And we're going to do, and so the majority of the class, they're working on these projects, doing the calculations because they're building a building out of toothpicks. It's not just trial and error. No, you got to do the calculations first. And then the kids who really don't get it, those are the ones the teachers can personally help, right? Personally help because they have the time to do it. So within a church context, it's exactly the same. You have a group of 30 small group leaders. Why do you think it's effective use of their time and your time for you to just for 30 minutes teach them how to connect or how to deal with overtalkers? Right? How do you know that they're actually going to be competent in their ability to deal with overtalkers just by listening to you? You don't.
Mm-hmm.
They need to practice it. So give the lesson at home, right? Via video. Here, watch this 10-minute video. And that's the other thing, right? You lecture in front of a live audience, it's typically going to be way longer than a video because
Mm-hmm.
you need the stories, you need the inflections, you need all that stuff. If it's a video, just go straight to the point. 5-10 minutes, bam, done, right? And people are okay with that medium and that way of communication, because if there's too much fluff, people are going to fast forward anyway, right? So having said all that, give the lecture at home, come together, right? That's the flipping the classroom. Give a 5-minute recap, envision them, thank them, encourage them, what you can do in person, and then say, okay, we're going to implement, we're going to do this project together, or we're going to have these conversations together. We're going to pair you up. Here's a case study and you guys work this, and you're the over talker and you're the group leader, and work it out so that people can actually grow in their proficiency. So that's obviously on the leadership development side. Post writing the book, I also have done this on the discipleship side, whereas a small group, now we would do book studies and then we would also do video based studies. So I was like, man, this is dreadful to just sit together, watch this together. And now our discussion is, we don't have a lot of time for discussion and we don't have a lot of time for prayer. So I was like, hey guys, let's all watch this at home, right? And we were using smallgroup.com from Lifeway and Right Now Media. And I mean, there's all these platforms, right? So we were using it, watch it at home, come together. Now, instead of 15 minutes for discussion and 5 minutes for prayer, we now had an hour for everything, or an hour and a half for everything. And instead of trying to, gulp down our food in 15 minutes, it was more time for food, more time for connection, more time for everything, way more margin, and there's a lot more connection. And yes, you're right, 100% of the people did not watch it. Yes. However, what was fascinating to me is that there's vertical accountability and horizontal accountability, right? Vertical is from the leader downward. What I realized is, as the leader, I didn't have to do the vertical accountability. Everyone was keeping each other accountable. Wow. And if someone didn't watch it, it wasn't actually me pointing them out. It was someone else in the group horizontally be like, dude, just put it on your phone while you're driving. Like, you have no excuse. And I didn't have to say that. Other people were doing it because they were like, come on, man, you're wasting our time. And it was just this neat dynamic that built, rather than me having to, come down with the ruler.
I love that accountability from the level playing field, not from above. Hey, you said something. I want to back up because there's a difference, or I'm interested in your take, because you said that one model was more towards during the book you were addressed it more from a leadership development side, and then you delved into more of a discipleship post the book. I just would love. What's the relationship between discipleship, disciple making, leadership development? I would love, as somebody at Lifeway, somebody with your experience, what's your opinion on that? Just give me a couple minutes.
Yeah. Okay. So vision, strategy, values in a church. Vision, strategy, and values. Vision is where we're going. And this is Great Commission, Great Commandment, right? Regardless of how you word it out. Strategy is what you do to get to where you need to be. Strategy in every church has to be, it's like a double helix, like DNA. And this is all in the book too. It's this double helix of your discipleship pathway or your leadership pipeline, right? Those are the two strands in your strategy. Every single thing that a church does, this is the what. Strategy is the what to get to the where vision, and values are how you do what you do to get to where you need to go. So in every church, everything that a church does, it's either going to leadership pipeline, equip the saints for the work of ministry, or it's going to, on the discipleship pathway side, mature them toward Christ, this directional point of view. So when it comes to flipping the classroom, when it comes to everything a church does, if we simplify it down to the sense of, hey, this activity, is it more focused on the discipleship pathway side or the leadership pipeline side? And a lot, there's going to be an interlinking of a lot. And that's why it's a double helix. That's why it's a double, I mean, there's a lot of interrelation, but here's the thing. Your leadership pathway and your pipeline and your discipleship pathway are not the same thing. And it's so important that we recognize that they are not the same thing. And I even heard people say, oh, leadership is just advanced discipleship. And I can't emphasize how important it is to understand that they are not the same thing. There's a lot of interrelatedness. That's why it's a double helix, but they're not the same thing. And here's why. And this is post book as well, right? What you believe on one, you will begin to assume on the other if it's the same thing. What you believe about one, you'll actually begin to assume on the other. So here's what I'm talking about. Your leadership pipeline. You can check off the box and actually say, I have displayed proficiency on this competency. I know how to do this. I didn't know how to do this, and now I've learned how to do it. Knowledge, experience, coaching, that's that transformational sweet spot. I have now demonstrated proficiency, and I now know. I'm done. I'm good. Great. That is awesome for your leadership pipeline. Discipleship doesn't work like that. You don't go, oh, I've checked off patience. I've checked off love. I've checked off humility. I've checked off joy. No. No, you are growing. And on this side of eternity, right? It never ends. And even on the other side of eternity, it doesn't end either, right? We're always growing in our knowledge of Christ, always maturing in our knowledge of Christ. So if they're the same thing, what you believe on one, you'll begin assuming on the other. And just like you can check off competencies on leadership pipeline, you'll begin to check off your discipleship pathway. And then you'll go down the road of program. You'll go down the road of, yes, I've done this. Look at all the studies on my shelf. See how mature I am? Yeah, no. It doesn't work like that.
We've got such an opportunity to impact people in different sides. I know personally, like in some of the churches that I work with, it's very easy to meld the two together. The helix is a beautiful picture where it intersects, where there's opportunities for it to work together, but there's urgency on each side for different reasons towards that. Is there, from a practical standpoint, just give me a couple things here, but from a practical standpoint, how do you separate between the two? Like Ed says, this is Ed, Ed's, okay, everybody, we're doing a weekend service. That's awesome. We're doing we're doing small groups. That's great. We need a third thing. I'm going to drop another guy who's been on the podcast, the Eric Geiger Simple Church, boiling it all down to two things. Yeah. Probably wasn't a good idea culturally where we are now, making fun of Eric. I love Eric too. We need a third thing. So let's go ahead and add a discipleship, intentional discipleship thing. That's what Ed's looking for. He's like Sunday night service, Wednesday night something, but an opportunity for that deep Bible exposure, driving people. So now if I'm separating leadership development, is that a fourth thing? Like, how many more things am I throwing on this?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
what does it practically look like
Mm,
to create a church
mm,
that's developing disciples and at the same time growing leaders?
mm. Okay, so last chapter of No Silver Bullets, we have our ongoing steps, our first steps, and our next steps. Right? So ongoing steps are those things where, as a mature follower of Christ, it's the practices that Jesus practiced. It's the things, and that's where the research of, here are the inputs. Here's 80/20. Here's the inputs that make the biggest output. So that's core, and that's not programmatic. That's the life of a follower of Christ. Programmatically, yeah, you got first steps. You're brand new, do alpha. You're brand new, come to here. You're, communication wise, and I mean, we can do a whole probably episode on echo chambers and how that affects church life and everything, because that was definitely, I've done a huge deep dive on that post this book, because it's crazy how it's affected discipleship. So that's on another note. And then you got your next steps. So what you were just talking there, deeper life, next steps. We're going to be doing these things called master classes, right? It's just this whole idea of what is that close to Christ-centered class to just go super deep. Because there is a sense of, yeah, everyone needs to be a self-feeder, but as a pastor, there is a sense of, hey, we need to really pour into and mature our people. So that's all great. Leadership, it's not another thing, because it has to be just in time type of
Mm,
training, right? And churches that programize leadership, and here's why digital is so important, right? Because inevitably, and sorry, there's a lot of things going on. My latest book, You Are What You Do, and 6 Other Lies About Work, Life, and Life. It's a gig economy, right? The premise is the gig economy is here, which is side hustles. So all that to say, people have asked me. So if you've written this book on how the gig economy has affected us lives as Christians and as people, what does this have to do with Sundays? Like, does this actually have something to do with the lack of attendance on Sundays? Because 36%, 35% of the American workforce is a part of the gig economy. That's 57 million people in America, right? And it's the same percentage in a lot of different countries. So the answer is, I don't believe the gig economy affects Sunday morning attendance, but what it does affect is your volunteer hours. What it does
mm,
affect is midweek, because now with the gig economy, every hour is a billable hour. Every hour is a billable hour now, right?
mm-hmm.
So now, instead of saying, oh, I'm work my part-time job for this person, I have to put in hours. No, every hour is a billable hour. So for volunteers who would say, oh yeah, I would have, yeah, whatever. I got lots of free time. Yeah, I'll go help you do that. I'll do this. And these days it's shrinking more and more and more, because every hour is a billable hour.
Right.
It's like, I could be doing this, or I could be Ubering for a couple hours, or doing, this contracting, and I could earn a few $100s, and then I could do this and go on this vacation. So I don't know if I have as much time anymore, Pastor. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So here's where this all loops together, going back to your original question as it relates to leadership pipeline, leadership classes, all that stuff. In your church, for every new volunteer that you have, you need to think onboarding. How do we onboard well? And that onboarding is not a class. The onboarding is just in time. Here's how to, apprentice wise or online wise, here's what you need to know. And let's get together, and I'm going to coach you, and we're going to work. It's on the job training. But for every church, you need onboarding, but you also need ongoing training. You need
Mm,
ongoing training, onboarding and ongoing. So an onboarding is immediate. Ongoing is, you need to develop the core competencies of your people so that they can move up your leadership pipeline. So the ongoing training, the only way that ongoing training is going to be effective is if it's delivered online. Because the worst thing that you can do is do a leadership development 101 class on another Sunday evening or after church. And it's one more thing where every hour is a billable hour, one more thing that people don't want to go to. And number one, they don't want to go to it because they don't have time, and every hour is a billable hour. But number two, it's like, what does this have to do with my life and me serving as a small group leader? Because
yeah.
it's so generalized It's so generalized. So, but it's important. Core competency training is critical to move people from volunteers to leaders to coaches, coaches to ministry directors, and up. So the reason online is so important is now flipping the classroom. You can highly specify the training. So it's just in time within relationship to that department, and it's very focused. And it's not another night out. It's literally on the commute to work. And then coming home from work, hey, let's talk on the phone, right?
Yeah.
It's just, yeah. So my spiel.
No,
You can tell I've been thinking a lot about this, right?
I love everything about this. Like
Yeah.
I'm so excited by this. What's interesting to me is I see what you're describing. I see churches who
Yeah.
do what you're describing, and just in my context,
Yeah.
they're church plants. They are church
Yeah.
plants, not with staff people, but
Yeah.
who are like there's a pastor
Yeah.
who's the paid guy maybe, or they're still fundraising, and it's a completely volunteer team. They
Yeah.
are the ones that are more driven by all this virtual technology and
It's
the
so normal now.
Zooms for the meetings. Like, and it's like the larger organizations where, no, let's just get everybody together. The multi-site church that it's like, yeah, let's drive everybody in to like have these conversations because we need to be in the room for it. But I love the fact that when I meet, and through Stadia, I'm just meeting more and more of them. A lot of these guys, it's like, well, yeah, of course we think we can do discipleship online. We do
Yeah.
everything else online. Like, it's not that far of a jump.
I know our
So,
culture.
like,
Here's the tipping point in my estimation, because online's been around for a long time, right? Especially training and all that stuff. I think the tipping point was when LinkedIn bought lynda.com. What was it, like, for $2 billion or something like that a couple of years ago?
yeah,
Honestly, I
I,
think that was the tipping point.
you're gonna have to explain that because that sounds really deep. Tell me why. Why is
Yeah.
that the tipping point?
So online's been around for a while, and there's this sense of, the educational world has definitely lagged behind, but the church world has lagged even more behind. And yeah, I mean, obviously you got guys like Leonard Sweet who are just like living 50 years in the future, and Half-Life, and there's all that stuff, right? I mean, the guy's brilliant, but he is
Yes.
literally from another century.
Yeah.
Like, he is so ahead of us, right? So
Yeah.
in light of all
He's
that,
he's got the Doctor Strange powers where he can
yes,
like
he
see
does.
all the alternate
No,
realities.
yeah,
4.7 million, and this is the one. This is
yeah,
the one. I love
yeah.
Leonard Sweet. Keep going.
I know. And by the way, I mean, CPLF Church Planning Leadership Fellowship, Stadia comes to it, but you should definitely come in July, and he's going to be speaking with us. It's church planning stuff, so we can talk.
Awesome.
Offline. Yeah.
Love it.
But basically, the reason I believe LinkedIn buying lynda.com was a tipping point is because you had all of these online training platforms forming, lynda.com, professional services, and you got Skillshare and Ministry Grid and Right Now Media, and you had all these different online kind of platforms out there. Educationally wise, Moodle, Blackboard was way behind, right? And then you had Canvas kind of start up, and it was like, oh, it looks better, but it's kind of just a facelift. And so all this was stirring, right? All this was stirring. And then LinkedIn bought lynda.com. I could be incorrect, but I think it was $2 billion, but I mean, I might be way off, but I know it was a lot of money,
Sure.
of money. When that happened, you began seeing a tipping point where around that time, YouTube then invested into YouTube education. TED created this TED
I see
Ed
what you're doing.
platform, right? So then master classes, which was, I mean, this is high end online training where I did the Malcolm Gladwell writing one. I was gifted that, right? And you can learn that, or you can learn, cooking from Gordon Ramsay, and it's just like, but literally the amount of money that was poured in the venture capital investment that's now being poured into master classes and all. I mean, it was just right. It was just so fast, but I found it was ticking along very slowly up until that point. And then, Zoom is now, like, who doesn't use Zoom? I mean, we're using Zoom right now, but it was just, yeah. So I think within the church world, we've gotten to that point now where everyone in like online, development, if someone's in a white collar kind of job, even if they're in a blue collar job, ongoing development is important. Certification is important, and it's more and more and more online. So why are we lagging so behind as a church?
I love everything about this entire conversation. This has been the highlight
Oh,
of a crazy
yeah,
couple weeks.
yeah.
I want to
I love
ask. I
this
want to
too.
ask
So
this. Yeah. Thank you. I want to ask this one question because I'm
yeah,
really interested. You've set this question up so perfectly. I don't even need to really, except I want to educate you on my terms.
okay,
Through
yeah,
Stadia, they hired me to be director of digital church planting. We are
yeah,
literally trying to figure out what a digital only expression of church looks like. As part of that, we're wrestling with the biblical ecclesiology
mm,
of what are the biblical functions, and not how do we mirror what happens in physical space
mm,
and do it virtually, but how best can we do virtually what the Bible calls us to do? So, example, teaching, we're doing a 40-minute sermon on a platform. Well, is a 40-minute sermon the best way to communicate
mm,
teaching? I
mm,
actually had a guy tell me, "Hey, you know what? Paul wrote when he taught. That
mm,
means that writing's okay. Why don't we just write?" And I'm like, "Wait, are
mm.
you telling me that teaching could be blog format? Like that nobody has." I have never heard that,
Oh man,
but somebody just kind of, and this is a guy I trust, Jason Morris from Westside
yeah,
Family, and so we're having lots of these fun conversations
mm-hmm.
in process to try to figure out how a church can function
Yeah,
100% digitally. There's
yeah,
guys like, and I may throw some things out that you don't know, but DJ Soto's doing VR Church. I don't know if you're
yeah,
familiar with
yeah, yeah,
him.
yeah,
Jade Earhart is doing a video game church, is that moving that direction, but he's got a discipleship platform from through Discord,
yeah,
literally discipling video gamers who are going out and witnessing while playing Xbox video games,
yeah,
winning
yeah,
people to Christ while
yeah.
winning
That's cool.
Destiny 2. It's crazy stuff.
Mm,
So here's my question to you,
okay.
because the average person had just explodes. Well, I talk about a lot on the podcast. So if they listen regularly, they've already exploded and it's old news. But for you, I want to ask this question. What are the challenges? What's the direction? What advice? Because we are pioneering towards this digital church thing. You
Mm,
obviously, through the past hour,
mm,
have a very good understanding of discipleship
mm,
and digital, which are
mm,
two of the things that I am building this foundation of digital church on. I
mm,
would
mm.
love to know your knee jerk reaction, and would you be willing to think about it and come back and have another conversation later? We can get to number two later,
Yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
number one, what's your knee jerk reaction when I talk about a digital only expression of worship?
Yeah. Okay. So I've done a lot of thinking around this too.
Of course you have.
Obviously not as much as you. Yeah. So, but when it comes to this, here's the thing: the role of the preach, right? The role of the preach, the role of that community. I still honestly do believe that that's a very important thing for the formation of our people. So yes, we need to be self-feeders. Yes, we need to, from the research, really be focusing on reading the Bible and being in community and all that stuff. But that gathered expression is such an important piece of formation that honestly, you're right. I don't think it has to be in person, but there is, and praise the Lord, we're Protestants, and we, when it comes to communion, it's just get your own juice and crackers, and let's do communion together. I think that's fine. In fact, my church here, Beulah, it's 99 years old. Used to do radio preaching back in like the 30s, 40s, where it would be printed in the newspaper. Hey, get your bread and your crackers or your bread and your juice ready because we're going to do
No
communion
kidding.
this Sunday over the radio. Yeah.
They were
So
doing bring your own communion in like the 30s and the 40s
yes,
over radio.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
That is a phenomenal story. I love that.
Yeah.
That's great.
So, and my church here, I mean, over 60 church plants since origin. So I mean, I love multiplication. I love being back here in Canada. But having said all that, yes, the gathered experience is so important. We can do it online. I believe it can be. I don't know. I haven't heard a lot of expressions of it being done really well online. And I think that technology is still growing. It's still advancing. And it's that tipping. I don't think the tipping point's been met yet on this piece.
Mm-hmm.
Who knows what the coronavirus is going to do? Like literally, I really do wonder what the coronavirus is going to do to church online and how it's going to be moving, how it's going to advance a lot of that too. But all that to say, I think the jury's still out in terms of what's the most effective way to do it, but let's experiment.
So I'm not taking that as a roaring endorsement, but I am taking that of, hey, it'll be interesting to see how far you get. No,
Yeah. Yeah.
here's the reality is, and I love Stadia for doing this, is there, hey, we want to throw some research and development behind this.
Mm.
And even the posture of when I talk specifically with churches that we're
Mm-hmm.
looking at to plant these,
Mm-hmm.
it's hey, we're experimenting. Come be part of the experiment with us.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, one of the pastors shot me an email, and this may be a bad thing, but he's like, whether or not we're actually successful in this, we feel like God's calling us to,
Mm.
because where we fail and where we succeed, someone else will come behind.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and so the posture of Stadia, which I love, is we're going to experiment and we're going to learn through this process.
Mm.
And if we're successful, awesome. The people behind us are going to have a better shot. And
Yeah.
somebody,
Yeah.
hate to say somebody's got to be first, but I feel like, honestly, like I've been wanting to do this, and I don't mean to overstate here, but it's literally been 20 years. I graduated from college in 1999,
Mm.
started a .com right there in the .com boom, towards helping churches work through this stuff
That's
back
awesome.
in 2000, right after Y2K.
OG, man. You're OG.
Yeah, man, and it's like I'm trying to find somebody, and man, just danced back and forth between
Yeah.
gigs, and Stadia's like, hey, come over here,
Yeah.
let's talk,
Yeah.
and
That's
seeing
great.
how they've run with this has been exciting.
That's
And
cool.
I hate to say it, like I'm going to call you out, like I'm building some of the stuff around the principles of what you're doing, and you're not
Yeah.
showing me enough love back. That's cool. I love you. I still want to have these conversations. I still want to come to the conference in July. Um,
I'll have you
but
speak at
it's
the conference in July. This will be good.
That's awesome. Is it in Canada? We'll have
No,
to
it's at
figure.
Wheaton. It's at
Oh,
Wheaton.
Wheaton. Oh,
Yeah.
that's awesome. Very
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. Well, if
Um,
we're allowed to travel, who knows?
I was about to say there's
Maybe we'll
a
do it all
bunch of things
online.
happening, but hopefully we can
Yeah.
get it figured out then.
Yeah.
Yeah. So listen, seriously, and I'll turn the corner. Thank you for this podcast. This has been in a world of coronavirus
Mm.
that is just inundating. The ability to laugh a little bit here, to talk about
Yeah.
things that aren't corona sensitive.
Yeah.
I hope my audience, who hopefully has a similar sense of humor as I do, they seem to enjoy these things. I hope they're
Yeah.
enjoying this in a lot of the conversation. So thank you for this. Just as we're landing the plane, Daniel, any closing thoughts, anything that you want to say or reference or hit on?
My church, we live stream. The number one, how we're using the live stream and leveraging the live stream. I really don't care if people watch it around the world. The one thing I really care about is those in Edmonton, and using this as a front door and moving people from that to a gathered location. So I do believe that church online can be leveraged and should be leveraged, especially when the front door is Instagram, I don't even think the front door is your website anymore, depending on the age. The front door it's your Instagram account, depending on the age, or it's your live stream, or for certain generations it's your website. So how do you leverage that as the new lobby to get people into community and saved and pointed toward Christ and discipled? So yeah, I love it. I love the work that you're doing and the thinking that you're doing toward this. So thank you for doing that, man.
Awesome. And as long as that front door leads into an intentional discipleship process that's utilizing online to make disciples, I love everything that you just said. And you're literally the guy that wrote the book, so who am I to question that? We're all about the no silver bullets. You mentioned briefly, and let's just let you tag on it. What was you've got a more recent book that you published. What gives the details on that?
Yeah, so it's called You Are What You Do and 6 Other Lies About Work, Life, and Love. So it's a book basically on the fact that the gig economy is here. Side hustling it's not, the questions move from have you heard of side hustles to what is your side hustles? So it's just an increase. It's a fast growing phenomenon. And I address 7 lies that have risen to the surface because of this gig economy. And it's a fascinating take, I believe, on here's our world is changing. The gig economy is affecting work. It's affecting life. It's affecting relationships. And here are 7 ways that it's doing that. So it is a discipleship tool, but first and foremost, it really is a tool that I'm hoping that people would use toward evangelistic means, because it is that sense, hey, you've heard it was said, but now I say to you, as it says, Matthew 5 with Jesus. So yeah, that's kind of the premise of the book. Your listeners can definitely look it up if they want.
Awesome. We'll throw some links on the show notes to both
Cool.
the books, of course. No Silver Bullets as well as the 6 Lies is what stuck with me.
Yeah.
Anyway,
you are what you do. Yeah.
You are what you do, which, by the way,
It's a lie.
I'm not gonna. Yeah, it's a lie. And I'm not gonna show it to my wife because I don't want to have to relive that conversation. So we are doing very, very well. So Daniel, thank you very much for your time. We're gonna wrap here for the Church Digital Podcast. Audience out there, thanks for listening. Hope you see you next time here at the podcast. You all have a good day.